digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session, and welcome to joining us on New Year's Day, no less. We have with us a whole array of sci-fi geekery nerdery on the show today. We are joined by the legend that is Jeff Gomez, CEO of Starlight Runner, storyteller extraordinaire. We have the lovely Alan Sott, who is the culprit in the sci-fi movie challenge that is about to ensue. We have the lovely Marta Svetek, who is just stunt woman extraordinaire, mocap awesomeness, Vikings awesomeness, and just don't ask to see her sword collection because you will be intimidated. We have the lovely Liam Dow, who claims to not be a sci-fi nerd. I'm not buying it. And then we have the lovely Sanj Storati, who is just a geek in all possible manner of the word, but also the coolest, hippest musician and stand-up comedian I know. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Happy New Year. Happy New
Hey
Year.
there.
Yeah.
So,
I like how swords came in the first 20 seconds of this podcast. I love it already.
well, you know, we need people to understand just how serious you are about your sword collection. But alas, we didn't pick any movies or TV shows that have any significant swords in them. So I'm feeling kind of bad now that I didn't pick something that had a bit more swords in it just for you, Marta. But
We'll work around it.
we can work around it. But what I wanted to do is I'm going to start out because the challenge here from Alan was to talk about
Not a challenge.
He's like, it's not a challenge. It is a challenge. He wanted to talk about how the sci-fi movies that we've seen have a lot of concepts and ideas that are very high-tech and very future tech. And oftentimes when we discuss things on this podcast, we talk about science and technology that's kind of on the cusp. We kind of know it's coming in the next maybe year or 2 years, but we tend to try and keep it reasonably reined in. We don't go too far out there in the total, 20 or 30 years from now type thing. And so we wanted to take an opportunity using some reasonably well-known sci-fi movies and TV shows as our guiding stars to discuss potentially some of the principles and themes around some of this technology. Now, there is a list. We're not going to bore our audience with the definitive list here, but I am going to pick a couple of movies off this list to begin the conversation. And Alan, because you challenged us to this conversation, you are my first victim. Are you ready?
Ready Player One.
Okay, bring it. So I wanted to discuss initially the movie Her, because I know that this is one of the ones that for me is it's very interesting in as much as it's not really in your face sci-fi. And by that I mean it's not like blaster guns and spaceships and all the stuff that, you really have to suspend a little bit of belief in order to really be able to buy into what's going on. Her is one of those movies where actually we're not really clear quite how far into the future this thing is, but when we look at the way that people are living their lives in the context of this movie, it doesn't feel that dissimilar to how we live our lives right now. By the way, we should warn all our lovely listeners that this is a total spoiler fest. If you have not watched any of the movies that we name, I advise you to stop listening, go watch the movie and come back to this podcast. But, Alan, in the context of Her and the kind of very near technology that we're seeing, and especially this idea of a relationship with an operating system, I kind of want to dig into this with you because I feel like it's actually quite interesting that we are in a bit of a society that has become very dependent on the technology. The reliance that we have on our smartphones and the personal relationship we have with the data we put on our smartphones means that actually we do have this very isolated, very insular relationship that's very unique with our smartphone. And to give that voice, to give that artificial intelligence and personality is not a huge leap. And I can see how many people would begin to have a very personal relationship with that technology, with that device, in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have with the humans in their life. So I'm curious from your perspective, Alan, when we look at that idea of kind of being tricked into a relationship with something that is artificial, what is your sentiment on this? Do you feel that this is something that we're quite close to?
I think tricked isn't quite the word. I think like when we get when we get new technologies and we interact with those technologies, it's funny because we actually interact with those technologies as if we're interacting with people in a large sense. I go back to I won't say her name because she'll say something to me, but I go back to her a lot. And for anybody who doesn't know, I'm talking about the Amazon product that talks to you. So, but whenever I think about these relationships with technology, I think to myself, I talk to her. Like whenever I have a question, I ask her a question. I ask her what the weather is, or she'll play music for me, or like I have some smart products throughout my house, and it's and I talk to her, and it's interesting because when she doesn't quite do what I want her to do, I get annoyed with her, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are the same way, where I'm just like, Alexa, stop. Would you just stop? So it's more of a human characteristic than it is a technology thing, is that we want to put some kind of personalization on everything. We want to make it a relationship. We tend to want to interact with that the same way we would interact with a person. The issue comes in, you were saying, where people are being removed from actual social relationships because of this, is those people who tend to already isolate themselves have a better ability now to isolate themselves because they have interaction. They view it as interaction. And therefore, if I'm speaking to her, and I'm an isolated person, that's all the conversation I need in a day. And I don't need to go and interact with people, especially if I'm socially, a little socially awkward. And I find if I have trouble interacting with somebody, it's really easy to interact with technology, because technology is not going to criticize you. Technology is just going to do what you tell it to do, and or give you the answers or have the conversations you want to have with it. So it makes it a lot easier. So it really does come down to I take a lot of things back to personal and human behavior. And I think it comes down to personal and human behavior, because certain people, the right people, will interact with that technology and it won't affect their day. Like I can have a conversation with people like I am right now just as easily as I can, speak with my technology, whether it be an AI assistant or, her. And, it comes down to, I think, individuals.
Okay, well, I find this interesting as much as you're talking about this idea of the isolation and the fact that if you are speaking to her, I'm just going to use it, her, that you don't.
Yes, I know you have her too.
Yes, I have the British version of her. You have the American version of her. But I do find it interesting that what we're talking about here essentially is this idea that if you have that in your life, you don't necessarily need other forms of social interaction. And I'm going to throw this one out to you, Jeff, in terms of the movie Surrogates, where we're seeing kind of the evolution of that thought process. Now we're getting a little bit more sci-fi, where we have these physical machines within which people are able to kind of control the machine and live out their life through the machine. And it gets to that point where, I use the phrase learned helplessness, because it does become that stage where people don't want to go out because they're so worried that what if something happens? What if I get hit by a car? What if I, fall over and hurt myself? If I'm in my surrogate, it's okay. It doesn't matter because my surrogate will survive. And so it becomes almost this assumption of normal that humans wouldn't want to interact with other people. They wouldn't want to put their physical body in harm's way when they have a robot surrogate that can as easily do these things and very much replace a lot of the interactions in their lives. And I'm curious, Jeff, from your perspective, how you see that playing out.
Well, I think all we have to do is look at our neighborhood empty shopping malls to see that we are choosing to use technology and project ourselves digitally, as opposed to getting into our cars and going somewhere and interacting with other people and with goods and things like that. That's an indicator, as is the entire movement of in terms of the rise of autonomous vehicles and such. We are giving over our sense of convenience, but also our sense of trust, our sense of faith in technology to these contraptions and these gadgets, and letting them kind of do the work to a degree. And let me assure you, what's going to get communicated to people is that this is a safer way to go. And And that can be interesting and positive, and it could also be really, really scary. We're being given surrogates for relationships, similar to what goes on in that film. In Japan, the artificial intelligence devices, some of them have avatars, so you can see a character on a screen. And that is an enhancement and inducement to having a kind of surrogate relationship, and that speaks to the fact that we are so rarely listened to, and the thing that AI does better and better almost every week is it's listening. It'll annoy you initially because it doesn't quite understand you or get you. But it's learning, so that friction is going to decline, and the intimacy or perceived intimacy is going to increase. That's really going to shift the course of human technology relations, and that's going to be fascinating, and it's going to happen sooner than we think.
It's interesting that you're saying this, because it almost is bringing us to a natural kind of shift into things like Westworld. And this idea that we create these environments, these spaces where we want these robots, these artificially intelligent robots, to essentially be at our whim. And we're beginning to see these types of patterns emerge more and more as we look at immersive theatre, and we look at the physicality of theme parks and how theme parks are evolving, and look at the new Star Wars hotel, where apparently people will have their own metagame when they go and stay at the hotel. They'll have a subplot that they're exploring as they stay in the hotel. This begins to feel more and more Westworld-like in its approach. And I'm curious, Marta, from your perspective, when we talk about this idea of utilizing technology to essentially live out these I'm not going to say fantasies, but these alternate, I suppose realities is the word to use here, that people want to experience different things or try different things, but they wouldn't do it in the real world. And so they want these safe environments as such. And I say safe with inverted commas, because if anybody's watched Westworld, it's not particularly safe. But that idea that, it is a dedicated environment specifically for this purpose, wherein the visitors, the newcomers, know that they are entirely safe because the robots hypothetically can't harm them. Obviously, that changes if you've watched the show. But... Yep. This idea that the robots are, programmed to not have an understanding of the world around them and the interaction with actual humans. But as we begin to see further and further into the show, there is this argument that they're becoming self-aware, whereas in fact it's actually, hypothetically, it's been programmed into them to question their existence. And so I'm curious from your perspective whether you see this as being something that, a lot of people are talking about gamification and immersive theatre and theme parks, and this kind of closer and closer to this real physical world where we're able to use 3D printing and robotics and artificial intelligence. And Westfield doesn't feel like it's really fiction anymore. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective where you see that heading.
I mean, it's really a multifaceted question. I think it needs a multifaceted answer, but I think it all starts with kind of the need for escapism that we all have to a certain degree, which starts with just storytelling in the beginning, how a book can mentally transport you into new reality. We always strive towards experiencing that to the fullest degree. And that's why I think we have so many different types of media, for example, for storytelling, and why continuously more immersive media are emerging, why we even have a need or any kind of interest in developing VR, for example, and developing AR, in sort of making these alternate realities, so to speak, that we can escape to without the actual danger. We can experience the excitement. We can feel, just in simple words, really cool. And we can kind of, at least in some way, realize what we actually want to be in some way. Do we want to be more heroic? Do we want to be more athletic? Do we want to be, this kind of gunslinger? Or do we want to be a scientist? This is a way to instantly gratify some side of us. we always look for this kind of gratification and escapism in these senses. And when you think about a lot of the technology that we've developed, it is to speed up gratification. It is to get what we want faster with less effort. And it comes down to basically the crossroads between the two in my mind. So, performance, yes, it comes into helping create these worlds, but it's more about, just creating these realities that we can escape to. And every single part of what we've created, from, again, VR to video games to, these meta games, like you said, there's more and more things that I'm seeing crop up where real life experiences are given an actual narrative for you to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Especially it started with immersive theater, and now hotels are doing it, restaurants are doing it. It's more and more becoming about an experience of like, you are now this really cool character and you go on a secret mission or whatever it is. You need to find this. You need to actually be placed into that. So you get a fully immersive experience. You're not just there looking at Star Wars props.
Mm.
Tanya, if I might, I was a little bit involved in the development of some of the gamified and participative aspects of what's going on at the Disney theme parks. And speaking of Westworld, the measurement that they're taking of those who are experimentally participating in this, it's off the charts. The difference that even a simple decision. So you're a guest at the park, you're moving through the park, a part of the park comes at you and causes you to have to make a decision, which is reflected in the RFID bracelet that you're wearing, the little Mickey Mouse bracelet,
mm-hmm.
and that's registered and creates a binary that allows for a kind of narrative path to be followed. What that does is that it individualizes your experience. You could be standing just a yard or two away from your companion, your sister, your family, but you're having a different experience from them. So at the end of the day, when you're talking to each other about what happened to you, your experiences are fairly significantly different. That is a huge leap, even without robots walking around in the park, you know? So that's hugely powerful, and it's going to continue to evolve. I think fairly rapidly.
I think.
Sorry,
well, just to add to that, I think that machine learning and things of that nature will also allow for us to have increasingly more individual experiences. You're literally building your own story within a universe that you love. For example, if it is in the Star Wars universe. If it isn't something else that, is recognizable. And I think that's incredibly powerful because there's always been kind of a demand for that from fan fiction, from, even just geek culture, cosplay, things like that, people have always wanted to sort of carve out a certain identity, not just personify. So I think that's an incredibly powerful driver, and technology is going to continue to evolve to enable that.
I think it is interesting, though, in what you're saying, Marty, but also in what Jeff's saying, in as much as if we look at the environments that are utilizing these types of tools, they aren't singular narratives. They are creative universes. And what we're talking about here is drilling down into the world building of these IPs, these franchises, to create a unique individual experience within the universe. And I think that's been the long-held dream of any cosplayer or any fan who's ever attended a Comic-Con, is to try and find their place in the universe, to quote Rey in The Last Jedi. But
it's true. It's true.
I do think it's quite interesting that we have this opportunity to explore from a kind of a mechanical and very physical hardware technology side of things, where people are utilizing things like robotics and AI and 3D printing and all those types of things. But then on the kind of flip side, one of the things that we're hearing more and more about lately is things like CRISPR and gene editing, and the kind of emergence of more fundamental genetic manipulation and the kind of prodding and poking, if you like, when it comes to adjusting the nature of human evolution. And I am quite curious, and I'm going to throw this one at you, Sanj. In terms of films like because we've got a few different films on the list here, but I'm gonna go with films like The Island and also the TV show Dark Angel, because I think both of these are incredibly relevant, where we're talking about environments and narrative universes where ultimately the idea of genetic development has been utilized by specific forces and purposes within each of these stories. So in The Island, it's for the very rich to be able to afford to have, backup medical, supplies, so they have an alternative kidney should they decide to drink themselves to death. They can have a kidney from their grown clone that they can remove from them, or if they don't want to have a baby themselves, they can just have their clone have the baby for them. And then on the flip side of that, in Dark Angel, it's been utilized by the military to be able to cultivate the perfect soldier and looking for specific traits and specific characteristics that will create the best possible human being and the best possible abilities to be able to ultimately carry out military tasks. And I am curious, Sanj, from your perspective, when we look at things like CRISPR and the application of gene editing and gene therapy as it begins to emerge, where you see the moral and ethical dilemmas beginning to emerge?
Wow, amazing question. I guess from this is just a perspective. There's a huge majority of this planet that would love to play God. Would love to create something out of the ordinary or something that's perfect, or whether it's refined chaos or whatever it is. There is something inside a majority of human nature that wants to, explore how to build something. And when that something becomes a human being or a living organism, to some people that can be quite exciting. And there's capitalist needs like making the best soldier, or making the most perfect human being from a pleasure point of view. And I try not to sound sexual here, but films like Blade Runner have kind of highlighted that discussion about what do you do if you're given this ability to make something?
Mm-hmm.
Do you do it? Do you not do it? Obviously the moral argument is you don't play God, you don't create these things because problems happen. And I think the Westworld really highlighted that problem in society, where if you are given free reign, what does that allow you to do? And if you're allowed to do those things, what are the consequences? So I don't know if that answers your question. My thoughts are, well, technology is going to evolve. Human behavior is going to evolve because of technology. And that's just a fact of the way, humans are going to evolve over the, in the future. Me personally, I don't want to create the perfect human being, because I believe, perfection comes from, the eye of the beholder, and you meet someone or you meet something and you decide whether that's right for you or not, or whatever, and everything in between. But, that there are some people that have needs or have gains, and they want to, make those gains become reality.
Okay.
Whether that's a pleasure park where you go into a room and you make love to as many robots as possible. And when I say love, it's not love. It's, I don't know where this is going, Tanya. We're recording this. I feel like I'm saying something that's going to get me into trouble or something. But, my thoughts on it. Yeah. I mean, it's inevitable. It's exciting, but it's also frightening. And there are questions that need to be asked.
Okay, but I'm curious though, Alan, from your perspective, because we've talked about this before, this whole kind of moral, ethical dilemma of, if you do decide to create a surrogate or a clone or whatever the terminology is that you want to give to this thing that you're growing specifically so that you can harvest it and utilize it, and it's a resource. It's no longer a human being with a soul or rights or, the perception of having a place in society. Instead, it is seen as that resource. It's seen as that blood bag or that, spare heart, in waiting, or whatever the thing may be. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on this in terms of, where do we draw the line? Where do we kind of stop and say, well, hold on a minute here. should we be looking at quality of life? I mean, we do this already with animals, when we're talking about, free range cows or chickens, we don't like the idea of cooping up these chickens in little, wire cages and they can't roam around free or whatever the thing may be. How does that differ for a human that you create in order to be able to harvest that human being?
So I think there's, first of all, I think there's a number of different paths that as mankind we can go down and we can follow. The moral implications, I just wanted to say real quickly, is that the moral implications don't just end with biotech. The moral implications, I do believe, exist with AI, and like when something becomes so intelligent, it's kind of redefining what consciousness is and what self is. I wanted to bring up, I know this is on the list, but there's a YouTube video. I think it's a YouTube, Kara. Has everybody seen Kara? I would imagine, where it's an artificially intelligent robot being disassembled and basically begging for life. And it's actually very disturbing, but it's actually very insightful as well. And I think as we go down this path of technology, what we need to do is make certain moral decisions along the way. Like, is it growing a human being for spare parts, or do we say, no, we just grow the parts? Or to be quite honest with you, we 3D print parts. We can, that is something that I think will be, available down the line. We'll be able to 3D print a heart based on your genetic, your genetic makeup, and 3D print a new heart if you have heart issues. From a technology perspective, like I've always, I love AI, but it's always been a scary thing to me because, we can't define our own consciousness. So how do you define consciousness within an AI being, or how do you differentiate one consciousness from another? You have Sophia, who wants to have children. Like for those of you who don't know who Sophia is, it's an AI, it's an artificially intelligent robot. I was reading an article, I do believe in Newsweek, a while back, where she said she wants to have a baby, and it's like, okay, well, at what point do you decide you're going to disassemble Sophia, who has who's just proclaimed her want to have a family? It's a little bit weird, and I think the moral implications here, a lot of these things that everybody's saying is going to happen most likely are, and I think we're going to hit a couple bumps in the road moving down this, but I think there are decisions that can be made on what path we're going to take that don't put us in the position to make moral decisions. 3D printing organs, when it comes to biotech, doesn't put us in a moral decision making position. When it comes to AI, controlling that AI to some extent and making sure it's just a program. But here we just want to push the buttons, and it's interesting. I think what the real question here is, because another path that we can go down is not the biotech path, but not the AI path. But when does technology become a part of us? Like when you look at the trend, over decades, we've gone from giant computers in warehouses to computers on desks to mobile computers to supercomputers that we can hold in our hands to wearables. And when you think about that trend, we have been actively bringing it closer and closer and closer. And at what point do we pass that threshold where we're not just bringing the technology closer, but we're integrating ourselves with the technology?
Well, that's happening now. There's a couple of digital technologists who are creating these cybernetic pieces of technology that go into your body. There's a guy called Neil Harbison who's created a component that's connected to his spine. And because he's colorblind, he has this camera that's coming out of his spine that goes over his head and in front of his eyes. And it basically vibrates in different ways depending on what colors that camera sees. So that's one example. There's another lady called Moon Rebus who's developed a component that's connected to her body, and it vibrates. It's in her elbow. It vibrates every time there's a tremor that happens around the world. So she's getting live metadata from the internet when a tremor happens, all over the world. And I think there's about like 13 different tremors that happen in New Zealand alone each day. So she's getting like these kind of pulses in her elbow every time that happens. And it's not because, she's she's crazy. It's just she's really interested in communicating with the world in that way.
It's interesting though, Sanj, because there are a lot of people who are experimenting with biohacking and cybernetics and kind of beginning to integrate this technology into them. But I still think that in terms of where Alan is coming from, I can kind of understand where he's coming from in as much as it's still kind of quite far out there when it comes to the mainstream population. Like if you ask the average...
It is, but people are really interested. I mean, the North Sense, so another guy called Liviu, who's developed this component that vibrates every time he faces north, which again sounds really bizarre. He set up his company, 2 years ago. He set up a shop on eBay, and he's sold over, I think it's something like 20,000 units already, because people are really interested in fusing this technology to their body. And, again, I agree with you. We're still in this kind of new and emerging space, but there is this kind of desire for it, this real, the same way, when we hit the digital revolution, in the late 90s, people are just really interested in this technology, and people are really excited about, embedding this technology into their bodies and becoming, these kind of futuristic things that we're moving towards.
I think it's interesting because I think for the people who aren't kind of in the tech industry or into tech and sci-fi, I think that there is perhaps a hesitancy in terms of a degree of trust. There isn't the trust there when it comes to having this technology embedded in their body physically, but having the technology on the surface of the body. So whether that is with a wearable, such as a Fitbit or whatever on the surface of the skin, or, I think that there is acceptance even for tattoo level technology. So things like the sound wave tattoos or the electronic tattoos that we're seeing out of MIT, that those types of technologies, I think people are open to the idea of. But I remember the story when somebody, there was an employer in London that inserted chips into people's hands, and those chips allowed them to basically gain access to the building. So it was like your security pass for the building, and then you could open and unlock doors, and you could, pay for your lunch or whatever the thing was. But basically, it was just a chip inside the hand. But there was so many people whose response was, "Whoa, hold on there a minute! I don't want to be part of the, a state that's you kind of overseeing everything I do, but because they've put this chip in my hand, they know what's going on and where I am and how long I spend in the bathroom and what floor I'm on." And, they didn't like the idea of it. There were a lot of people who felt that there was a degree of trust that was being breached by allowing the technology to actually be implanted in their body. And so, Liam, I'm kind of curious to find out from you whether or not you feel comfortable with the idea of embedded technology versus surface technology, and this idea of having a chip or some kind of hardware inserted physically into your body that is it's a pretty permanent thing once it's happened, versus the idea of having, whether it's an electronic tattoo or a sound wave tattoo, for example, that it is very much part of decorative art on your body, but the technology isn't fundamentally part of what that thing is. And whether or not you feel that there is perhaps a different perception of these different types of technology and the degree to which they impact one's daily life.
I personally think that there is, like I say, a different perception when it comes to having a chip implanted into yourself compared to just having something that's a wearable. Going back to what you just said about how people are saying, "Oh, I don't want to be controlled by the state and have a chip implanted into me and have people tracking everywhere I go." They kind of forget that they're already being tracked as it is. Your mobile phone is constantly being tracked. Your Oyster card is tracking all your movements. It's no different than carrying those things in your pocket or in your wallet compared to actually just having it inside your hand. For me, it's something that really interests me. I don't know how many, I know yourself, you probably know this, but not many of the listeners will probably know this. I'm a big advocate for the tattoo industry, hugely into things like body modification and such things like that. I have a lot of friends that are into that area, guys that will put pieces and jewelry and different things under their skin and such things like that. So to me, that doesn't really bother me. That's kind of the norm in some ways. But to have it kind of as an electronic device that I can unlock my door at home, that I can pay for my sandwich at lunchtime, that I can get onto the tube with, to me, that's awesome. To me personally, that's perfect for the future for me. I can understand why people will be a bit freaked out by it, but I suppose for me, it's kind of just the norm because I see it all the time through my friends and people that I know throughout the tattoo industry. So yeah, but for me, I think it's something. It is a step that it's going to take some time for people to kind of latch onto.
Okay, well, let me give this context then in terms of the idea of smart pills, which is a small pill that you swallow, and once it's inside your gut, it's essentially powered by the stomach acids and the linings within your stomach, and as a result, it will always have power. For as long as you are alive and it is inside your stomach, it'll always be powered. And once that smart pill is inside your body, it can be utilized for a whole different array of things. So it could be that it's releasing certain types of medicines into your body at certain times. It could be that it's connecting to a tablet device or a smart device outside of the body, and it's feeding back information about the health of your body to your doctor or whoever else. And with that, that's a very permanent piece of technology that once it's inside the body, it's not coming out. It's there for good. And because the technology is still so new, I think that perhaps the perception and the fear is that, well, anybody can kind of hack into that information, or anybody could do something that might harm you because you have that technology within you. And I'm curious, Jeff, from your perspective, whether or not there is perhaps a bit of a disconnect in as much as we as technologists, we as people who are within these tech industries are perhaps in a little bit of a bubble versus the mainstream population who are not used to these ideas of these types of technologies and may feel intimidated by the idea of something that's very permanent within their body, and that there isn't necessarily any proven security or defense against somebody hacking whatever that thing is inside your body.
Oh, no, it's just really going to be a matter of time. And again, it's not going to be a long time. We've had mechanical parts put into our bodies for many years now, artificial devices, pacemakers, and things like that. And now we have elements, friends of mine who have diabetes have elements that are inserted into their flesh, into their bodies, that communicate with their mobile phones and give them a sense of the measurements and the elements that are in their blood. That in turn can be communicated to their doctors if they want. And this is a matter of routine now. It is not a great leap at all to believe that we can have such things in our bodies that make life convenient or give us access to instant information and things like that outside of the body that we're holding constantly versus inside. Not a great leap. It is, almost definitely going to happen within the next few years. This is going to start happening. Issues of security. There are so many groups around the world that are working to create incredibly complex security systems that would simply make it not worth the time and energy to kind of hack the average person. That stuff is happening now as well. If we could have a similar reasonable expectation that our bodies won't be hacked as we do our iPhones, I think you're going to get customers.
Okay. I'm envisioning a Demolition Man style future where we're all embedded with our chips and hopefully.
But Tanya,
yes.
What do the seashells mean?
So I personally think the seashells is like a version of a Japanese toilet where there are so many buttons and gadgets that nobody really knows what to do with a Japanese toilet when they first sit on one for the very first time. I think that's what the 3 seashells actually is. But I am curious, given that this is the very first episode of 2018 and we have the entire year ahead of us, what I want to do is, in keeping with the theme, is to ask you each to give us your suggestion of the technology or the cultural kind of thing that you've seen in a sci-fi movie or a sci-fi TV show that you think is on the cusp of happening in 2018. What is that thing that you're just like, you know what, it's not so far away from reality anymore, and I'm just going to put this one on the table and ruin it for all of you now. But I'm going to say that a lot of what we're seeing in things like Black Mirror is actually not that far away from reality in any way, shape, or form. And it's literally a sneeze away from happening in many cases. And so I am curious, from your perspectives, what is that TV show or that movie where you're just looking at the technology in it and saying, you know what, it's not so far-fetched. It might actually happen this year. So I'm going to start with you, Sanj.
I know Elon Musk announced it earlier this year, but I'm really quite excited about the driverless trucks that they've launched. I know Pepsi have bought something like 1,500 of them already to ship their sugary water around America. That's quite exciting. I mean, that's a proper seismic shift in business behavior in one of the one of the largest countries in the world. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that. The automation of vehicles.
Okay.
That is not based on a movie from Tanya's list, but I might offer Furious 7.
I was going to go with iRobot, actually. I think it's quite, there are a lot of autonomous vehicles in iRobot. But Jeff, what is the movie that you think the tech that is kind of on the cusp?
Well, I loved Arrival. And I actually think that we are rushing toward a situation where, there are dominant forces moving across the world that are attempting to confuse us, to divide us, to make us kind of exist within our own kind of reality bubbles, and not understand what the facts of the matter are. And we saw that in a certain way dramatized in Arrival. And the hope as we move into this new year that I have is that there is a kind of collective consciousness, a kind of a group effort to be united, to transcend these conflicts in the service of the facts, in the service of science, and in the service of the underlying values that all human beings hold, so that we can push past this kind of bizarre moment in history and start to solve problems, using leveraging social media, leveraging the computing power of the internet and the cloud, and being able to communicate genuinely with one another once again.
Okay. Liam, what's your thoughts on this?
Once again, it's going to be a film that's not off the list. Everyone predicts it every year. Hoverboards. Everyone's going to want a hoverboard. That is it.
Back to the future.
I want a hoverboard. I want a hoverboard.
A real hoverboard or the knockoff that we have now?
Oh, that's a good point. No, real hoverboard. I want a Mattel.
Yes, I've been waiting for a long time for those.
Technically, they already do exist. I believe that there is a hoverboard that does exist. It utilizes metal or magnets or some such.
Yeah, it was done on aluminium. I believe there's a video online of Tony Hawk going up and down a half pipe.
Tony Hawk, yes.
So, but I want a real one. I want the one they can use on the street, not on water though. It doesn't work on water.
You can't do it on water. It's not possible.
There you go.
Okay, Alan, what's your thoughts in terms of the tech or culture that you've seen in a sci-fi movie or TV show that you think is literally about to unleash upon us in 2018?
I think I want to. It's funny because I want to go in two directions here. I think 3D printing is one that got really popular, really like as a term, as a technology. It got really popular. There was a lot of talk about it, and I don't see that so much. But I do believe that in terms of society being excited about it, but I think that people don't quite understand what those capabilities are and what we will be able to print in the future. So I'd like to, I think we'll see more of that. Another one, the other side of that is I'm going to go back to technology integration. One of the things that I'm looking at from a bunch of industries too is, you look at things like screens getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it's not going to be long. And this does go to a Black Mirror episode. Absolutely. Actually, it won't. I don't see it being that long before we have contact lenses that take the place of wearable, whether it be glasses or even VR goggles. When you're talking about augmented reality and virtual reality, I think the next logical step is a lens that you can see-through, but when it's activated, you see those augmented realities or those virtual realities, or you can flip through, in Black Mirror, they flip through videos and flip through your memories, basically, all right there in your eyes. I don't think that's too far off. I think I think that's on the cusp.
Okay. Interesting. Well, as always, we like to give our listeners a way to find out a little bit more about you and what you're up to. And we ask you to do that by sharing your social media handle of choice. What would that be, Sanj?
You can get me on 2 handles. It's Sanj Surati, SanjSurati, or on Tiger Heart Tech, which is TigerHeartTech.
And that's on Twitter, yes?
Both Twitter, Instagram, wherever you want me.
Liam, what about you, good self?
On Twitter, and that is @RiftBDM.
Thank you. And Jeff?
You can find me on Twitter @Jeff_Gomez.
And we mustn't forget that underscore. The other Jeff does not like it.
He gets pissed off.
Marta.
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on Twitter @martholio.com, or you can just search my name because I'm the only one with my name.
Wonderful.
Luckily.
Thank you very much, Marta. And saving the best handle for last, Alan, would you care to share with us your social media handle of choice?
As always, you can find me on Twitter @badass_marketer.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on this New Year's Day. We hope that you have a wonderful start to your 2018, and thank you for joining us on this Digital Jam session. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter @DigitalJamLTD. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. DigitalJamSessions.com